Back live tonight here on In Focus. NSFAS funding problems at institutions of higher learning seem to be going nowhere. In fact, getting from bad to worse. Some University of Pretoria students say they will march to the union buildings tomorrow over the unfair defunding of beneficiaries by the financial aid scheme. We've got DA joining us for this conversation, DA Shadow Minister of Higher Education, as well as the national spokesperson of the South African Union of Students, Asive, Dlanjwa, and to get their views on how this matter should be dealt with. Good evening to you both, and thank you very much for coming on. Asive, are we past the problems of the new banking or funding platform? Have those been resolved, or are those still pending?
Thank you, Butabo, and good evening to you, to my fellow guest, Chantel. Yes. So I suppose there's still a crisis. That is the truth. We have not gotten through yet what one person could call it teething problems, one person could call it incompetence or inefficiencies, but the bottom line is that we are still having thousands of students that are not able to access their allowances as they should have. And that is currently where we are as things stand. Yeah.
But over and above that, then, you are also dealing with this situation of the defunding. So I was listening. I didn't get the full conversation, but I had parts of it, right? NSFAS was talking in an interview sometime this week. One of the biggest concerns is that this defunding is happening in the middle of the academic year. And the response was, well, you discover corruption mid-term of the contract. What do you do? Do you continue with that contract, or do you terminate that contract to recoup some of the funds that would have been lost?
No, not really, Butabo. I mean, that's not the situation. Whoever said that would have been oversimplifying it, or in fact scapegoating what was in fact just poor decision making. Because number one, the SIU report, which is supposedly the premise by which the students had been defunded on, came out at least 2 months or 3 months ago, if I'm not mistaken. And so action would have had to be taken then, 1. 2, there would have, and this was our contention, there should have been a process to establish as to, so if you have people that you are currently funding and you pick up whatever you pick up, especially when you know that your systems are very, they're not strong enough and they're not credible, you then run a process to invite those students to make the necessary representations to ensure, because in any case, some of those outcomes of that SIU report were based on information that was received by information of at least a year or 2 years back. So some of those students, for instance, right now we are getting unconfirmed reports, which we should confirm in the next 48 hours, that more than 10,000 of those students, in fact, that had been defunded, have now been refunded again, because it appeared that on the side of NSFAS, in fact, they erroneously identified them. And that was our contention, that before you defund even a single student, invite all of them, let them make the necessary representation, look into each case, because you will then find that some of them, their parents are no longer employed, etc., etc. Yeah. So the point is that, one, a process should have ensued to establish whether the students qualify to be funded or not, and you don't take a blanket approach. And also, we completely agree to do it in the rash and harsh manner in which it was done in the middle of the year was absolutely unacceptable.
All right, I'll come back to that in just a moment. Chantel, your views on the Zaga payment system and the teething problems there, but also this question of the SIU saying there are 40,000 students who illegally benefited from NSFAS, and so mid-year those students are being defunded.
Good evening again to everyone and to my fellow panelists. The Zaga system is going to be a bit problematic because of the haste the way it was implemented and forced onto institutions. We also know that there were 3 tenders that went out for it was
Chantel, sorry, Chantel, we're losing you there. We are losing you, seemingly having a very bad connection there. We'll try and
now faced with these amounts of funds to students. When it comes to the connectivity in terms of interlinking NSFAS ICT system with those of the various service providers. So our concern also is the process should have been dealt with better. Students should have been informed timeously when this was going to happen. This should have been a process for next year, not in this year of 2023. We are also concerned because just today we had discussions around the irregular defunding of students. And I agree with my panelists that what they should have done was to put the lists of students out at institutions, notifying them that please, these are the information that we require of you to ensure that you are not defunded. And unfortunately, that did not happen. Till today, some of those defunded students still do not know. They have been asked to vacate their institutions, their accommodation. And that is concerning that in the middle of a year, a student is now faced with a situation where their access to education is now infringed.
Yeah. Again, Asive, are they oversimplifying the matter here, NSFAS, when they said, well, an appeals process has always been available to students. If students, as you say, when they did this investigation, had both parents and now things have changed. They no longer have both parents. Students, all they needed to do was to come with the necessary documentation and make those representations, and they would not have been taken out of the system. And those who did, actually, and which is what you're saying, some are being refunded now, would have their situation would have been reconsidered and they would have been brought back.
But you can't appeal if you are funded. You appeal if you have been rejected. The students were not rejected. They were funded. They were carrying on with the life. They had been receiving their allowances. Their tuition had been paid. Their accommodation was being paid. And then they wake up one day. They are told that they are no longer funded. So it had nothing to do with an appeal. So they had no recourse. That is exactly what we are saying, that the students should have been given some level of recourse once identified by NSFAS to have been improperly funded. There should have been a process for them to do exactly what you are saying, to make the necessary representations to NSFAS so that they don't just get this. So what we found now was that students that had been funded from the beginning of the year suddenly were no longer funded. We've got thousands of those students who are speaking. And I had also mentioned, in fact, to someone that some of those students, by the way, are orphans. So you ask yourself, how was the student even identified in the first place? The student is an orphan. So that is exactly what we were saying, Butabo, that there should have been a process in the very first place.
So I'm saying what they are contending is that, yes, as you're saying, mid-year the funding would have stopped. Even then, they're saying at that point, you could still, in other words, the door was not closed for you to come and make representation and say to NSFAS, you are defunding me erroneously. I think that's the English.
It lies.
Yeah.
It is
so
lies.
you're saying that avenue is not open.
That is why even your English bundles are depleting, because that is not true.
Yes.
This is why the students are not having funding exactly where they are now as we speak. They have had to run after NSFAS to try and make the necessary representations to ask, hey, why have you defunded me? If any official of NSFAS can provide proof right now that no, when we defunded them, we gave them an avenue to say, we have defunded you, use this link to appeal your defunding. Let them come forward. They will not bring such proof because it does not exist. It's not true, Butabo. That did not happen. It is the students that have had to pursue NSFAS to prove and to plead their cases.
Yeah, and Chantel, they are saying here that they have found out that some of the students, of course, fall outside of that particular, the 350,000 rands threshold. Hence, the Department of Higher Education is now talking of some kind of an intervention of some kind of grant or some kind of loan that is outside of that to be able to accommodate them.
So you're referring to the long-awaited comprehensive funding model, which Minister Blade has been just talking about. We have not had sight of it. Speaking to BASA some time ago, it was actually established that, yes, it would be cheaper for students to go to that route. But we gave them a different alternative. We actually explained some time ago that why not have one funding model, application process on one system, because there are various bursaries available for students which they have no privy to. So we've actually asked that the systems of NSFAS be changed in such a manner that we actually have the NSFAS state funding, but we have various multiple bursaries on the same as well as loans. Now we find ourselves that NSFAS is actually more willing and eager to spend 1.5 billion over 5 years on service providers, which are actually costing more for students than what it are for the service providers. So yes, there is actually a long-awaited comprehensive funding model which is not feasible. We do know that Minister Blade Nzimande is finding himself wanting when it comes to fee-free higher education. And the reason why we have this situation of defunding is because of the fact that they cannot actually afford to fund more than a certain threshold of university students, because, as you know, after COVID, more and more students would now then qualify for the bursary system of NSFAS. And unfortunately, we do know that the state coffers will not be able to afford that after a certain time.
Yeah. So I spoke to the SIU when this particular report came out, and I asked them exactly that particular process, the process that was followed, right, Asive? And the SIU says, we don't discriminate against anyone. We are not looking at you at the color of your skin or whatever, who you are. We are just merely following the facts. So we receive information about the student. We follow your ID number. We see your parents, who you're attached to, whether they're alive or whether they're dead. We look at bank accounts. You know, they're saying it's that clinical. And they see the money that's coming in, and they do the affordability. And that's how they reached this conclusion of the 40,000. Nobody was unfairly treated in this particular process.
We support Butabo, all efforts to root out corruption wherever it is found. But the SIU, sometimes, I think they're a little bit lazy, or they love low-hanging fruits. Because when you look at the reported 5 billion rand that the SIU claims was given to students that did not qualify, that far surpasses the amount of money that is in fact being embezzled through corruption that is found within institutions of higher learning. In the very same period of investigation that the SIU was investigating, they would have found, for instance, that there were certain monies that were being withheld by universities that they would not pay out, which is one of the reasons, by the way, we call for a direct payment system as a student body, because we are saying some universities would withhold the allowances of students and invest them and use their interest for whatever they did, but the bottom line, they would deliberately withhold allowances from students. So the point here that I'm making is that we are not opposed to the SIU, or in fact, we even said in our statement that if any student was found to have sought to defraud the state and make false representations of information, that yes, there must be consequences for that student. We just said that they must not be criminal in nature. We explained that. I will not bore you with that, number one. Number two, so I think I've clarified that we don't have a problem with that investigation. We are saying it must be thorough and they must go to the cracks of the corruption. Number two, I have to address what might be misconception around the comprehensive student funding model, so that my honorable guest, Ms. Chantel, does not mislead viewers. There is nothing unaffordable. In fact, if we took heed from what the DA says as it pertains to the affordability of higher education, right now as we speak, more than 80% of the poor and the working class will not be affording free higher education, because this is what they had claimed pre-2017 before government would announce. And right now as we sit, Butabo, we sit with more than 90% of households that have access, in fact, to a higher education, at least as far as their first qualifications are concerned. The MTT report, we can agree to the extent to which that the minister has been very slow in terms of the turnaround time. But also it would be unfortunate if Ms. Chantel, as a shadow education minister, has not seen that, because that would have been presented to the portfolio committee, as far as I understand, that MTT report that I think it made about 18 recommendations, and of those 18 recommendations, they're a product of the market, of institutions, of students, and everyone. And we agreed that the recommendations that are there are in fact very progressive in terms of funding higher education. Yes, she's correct. It speaks to issues of loans. It speaks to issues of centralizing student funding for higher education so that it's a one-stop shop. These are all recommendations that are within the MTT report. If we must crack the whip, we must say the minister must move fast in that implementation.
All right, African Union of Students spokesperson Asive Dlanjwa and Chantel King, speaking on behalf of the Democratic Alliance, Shadow Minister for Education, there still with us, and you weigh in on 072-110-5584. Chantel, the unaffordability does not even begin to factor in. The number of progressive recommendations, but unaffordability does not begin to feature.
Yes. So let me first respond to Asive. So the Union of South African Students, they were also part of the discussions when it came to the accommodation cap. They were part of the discussion when it came to the service providers. We do know that they were privy also, because they were one of the stakeholders that were completely engaged with. So at the end of the day, I don't understand on why they have allowed this to go so far. Because yes, it was discussed in a portfolio committee, which he was also part of, I assume. And at the end of the day, if he had listened clearly, I said it's not a centralized system that we are focusing on. It's partly because of the centralized system we are sitting in this situation. Decentralization is very important, especially when it comes to NSFAS, to revert it back to institutions of higher learning for easy access for students to query the issues and the challenges and to highlight it, and then to solve it at source. Currently, we are sitting with a situation where the systems of NSFAS is also slow. Couple that with blatant demands, insistence of not releasing the comprehensive funding model as of yet. It was due to have been released in June. We are still waiting on the comprehensive funding model for proper discussion in the public domain so that students and other stakeholders can have input into that comprehensive funding model. As of yet, we can just assume that the funding model delay at this time is because the minister really understands that South Africa finds itself in a situation where financially it is not viable at this current juncture to support fee-free higher education, which was also mentioned in the USAF report to universities that they cannot afford that. The decentralized system will also then be helpful to ensure that the missing middle is also forming part. And if you had listened clearly, I said when the system is changed in such a manner so that on one platform you can apply for multiple sources of funding, not only NSFAS, and that has not been happening.
So as far as the DA is concerned, you see no benefit whatsoever to the streamlining of the application process.
We have benefit because at the end of the day, what is happening now, the system is not linked. That is the problem that we are sitting with. And that's why you have this anomaly where NSFAS and the institutions and the third stream model of the service provider are not synced and interlinking. At the end of the day, that is causing confusion. Hence, we have this system where since 2018 to 2021, we had the score of the 40,000 students that actually, as per the SIU investigation, benefited erroneously. So why is NSFAS now defunding students on the basis from 2021 up to now? We have first-year students who phoned us today, was very frustrated because they have been defunded, and erroneously so. Yeah. So those are the issues that we would expect the student representatives would have discussed beforehand. And only when they were caught up, they realized now they're in a situation we need to defend ourselves.
Yeah. Asive, should NSFAS be decentralized?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we have made that recommendations many a times before. What we do not agree with is the decentralization of the payment. So in terms of the information, for instance, let me give you an example. Right now, universities would have to upload payment files to NSFAS, and then NSFAS would disperse the funding. Even application, for instance, appeals and all of those things, they are done directly at NSFAS. And there is no, at the grassroots, students do not have access to NSFAS. So yes, the operations of NSFAS must be decentralized. Our decentralization does not mean to give university officials power, as they have been doing, to squander funds. And we've got many cases, even in our previous statements, you will see, where university officials are the ones that are appointing the service providers, one, two, that they're even owning some of these accommodations. So to deal with all of those issues of corruption, as far as the disbursements of allowances, that has to be centralized. Or rather, it must be direct from the state to the students. We have no apologies about that. To the issue of we should have raised these things, these are all issues which we have raised. You see, even when we met with you, Butabo, some of the issues we are raising, you will know that we are not raising it for the first time. So I think our concept of centralization and decentralization might differ. Ours is that in terms of students having access to NSFAS, NSFAS must be all over the country, not just in Cape Town. That's as far as we are. Not that universities must do that. As to the challenges that are faced by NSFAS and that the student body should have seen, blah, 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 all of those things, we don't need to prove ourselves to anyone. As far as we know exactly the contribution we have made, to the sector. As we sit here right now, against the wishes, for instance, of the Democratic Alliance, we said that let the allowances of students be increased. When they said they cannot afford, we said the allowances of students must be increased because they cannot afford to live off 1,500. So we are not going to prove ourselves to that as far as that is concerned. The issue, Butabo, we must clarify this. We have a responsibility to educate society. It is bogus to say that the funding, that it cannot be afforded, because if you read that MTT report, it says that one of the sources of funding will be the private sector through banks. The only difference is that the students will not go apply directly at the bank. They would apply through NSFAS, but the source of the funding would be the private sector and not the state. It is really unfortunate that you are bringing people here that are not sorry about that, Butabo. So I was saying it is really unfortunate that the likes of the Democratic Alliance have not read that report. They come on public platforms and speak wishy-washy and wishes. The report is clear that the funding will not all come from the state. Some of it will be through loans, so that we can also be able to find the missing middle and also postgraduate students. So to suggest that the MDT report, there's no funding for it, tells us that, in fact, these people are just preoccupied with opposing. They don't read. Read the report, Ms. Chantel. You will see that the source of funding is not only government. Even private sector has come to the party to say that they are willing to fund. We must just agree on a model. It is there in the report. Read the report.
Could that be, Chantel, I'll give you an opportunity to respond, but could that be where the challenge is? The fact that now you would need to have this hybrid approach to it, and this model that higher education now needs to take to the private sector on how this could be carried out?
Let me also... Okay, Asive.
I just wanted to find out, could that be part of the delays why the MTT has not been finalized?
That is one of the excuses. I will call it an excuse, Butabo, because we think government should be a little bit much more agile. That is an excuse that we have received in one of the, I think it was a meeting we had about 2 months back or so, where we were told that, the department had still been engaging with some of the banks. In fact, they had presented the first report of the MTT to Cabinet, and Cabinet had said they must go back and engage more with private sector and banks, etc. And so we were told that was the delay. But it is not a delay we can accept, because if there's one thing where I will agree with Ms. Chantel on, we did receive a commitment last year in October that latest by June this year that MTT report would have been implemented. So if it is alleged that's the case, but we can't accept it. It just tells us that someone somewhere is being incompetent and not carrying out their responsibility as they should.
Right, Chantel, you can weigh in. It's not all government money. It will also come from the private sector.
Yeah, it's a pity listening is not the skill or comprehension. What I'm saying is not coming through. Because what I just said was there must be one platform where students, when they apply for either state funding, which is the NSFAS. They then can also then apply for private funding, which is the various companies that will also on that platform have their bursaries where students can apply, which will cover the missing middle. It will have the banks where students can apply. It will have also other government departments which offer bursaries on that very same platform. So one student can apply for up to 20 bursaries on one platform. So it's a pity he didn't listen to what I say. It's
that's what the report says. That's what the report says, Chantel. It's not your idea.
Hold on.
It is not your idea. It's what the report says.
Asive, hold on.
It's not your idea.
Hold on a second.
Idea.
Give us a chance to respond. Chantel, I want to find out, but is that not a centralized somewhat system? So you're looking for a one-stop shop where everything will be in one place and they can apply and get 20 bursaries. Is that not a form of centralization?
Can I tell you, for the application purposes, it is good to have one-stop stop for multiple. But in terms of the funding distribution, it will be done by the various departments because NSFAS will not then be responsible for the other bursaries. A student can tap on the platform and then have access straight to the link of the various bank or to the various business that is offering. So NSFAS will not have actually control over it. Also, which is of big concern that is coming up, which is not being spoken here. NSFAS is also vying for CETA funding because according to the white paper, it actually states that CETAs should not actually consider running their own bursaries. It should be handed over. So NSFAS is also trying its way to get that type of funding into its grip. My concern with that would be then, at the end of the day, the missing middle would still then be missing out because it would still then reach on this cap that only working class and the poor students should benefit, which is good. But where does the missing middle then also benefit from state funding?
Yeah, well, I don't think that's the intention, but I think the intention is that the missing middle will be funded through some kind of private sector funding or some kind of grant, but not necessarily would be coming from the NSFAS fund. Am I incorrect in that assumption?
We don't have to speculate, Butabo.
You are correct in that. That is what is. Hold on. That is not.
Yes? We don't have to speculate, Butabo. We must just read the report. What Ms. Chantel is saying is there. It is in black and white. I will send it to her maybe after this. It is clear. One of the proposals there is to increase, for instance, the cap from 350,000. Our proposal as a student movement was 600,000. Obviously, subject to availability. Now, that might be the case, that might not be the case. Now, it could even increase by 10,000, to the amusement of the DA. It would still cut the missing middle by a considerable chunk. Now, then, to the extent to which that cuts, then that is where we would then introduce loans, government-backed loans, that the source thereof would be the private sector, and the repayment terms would not be as aggressive as those of going to the bank. Yeah. They would be, as when NSFAS used to be a loan, they would be friendlier in that manner, and students would pay upon them having a job. So it does cater for the missing middle. And obviously, it does not necessarily mean that wherever is the source of the funding, the students must interact with that particular stakeholder. The students would be interacting still with the state through NSFAS. It is just that at the back end, the source of the funding will not be necessarily the state. So it would be various models. For instance, we even proposed there part loans and part bursaries as you go up into the missing middle. So those are all proposals that are there. It's a comprehensive model. It has about 18 recommendations. It is there. let us read it. We don't have to speculate as to what would be the intervention as far as the missing middle.
Let's wrap it up. Let me give you a final chance, Asive, and then I get Chantel to close. The march tomorrow, what are you hoping to achieve? This memorandum has already been given to NSFAS. Taking it to the union buildings, to the department, how different is that going to play out?
It is students that are going to some SRCs that have come together to go to the union buildings, and some students have been protesting on their campuses even today. We are in full support of the students that are in protesting. We are in contact with them to say that for as long as they have not received their allowances, they must do whatever is necessary within the confines of the law to ensure that they put the necessary pressure onto government, and where they can, even institutions, to push government, because these are public institutions, to push government to ensure that they receive their allowances. We're in full support of that. We are saying that once again that the government must take charge of the sector. Some universities have gone rogue. There are universities, it's a pity that we did not deal with it in this interview, that have deliberately also been fueling this instability in the sector. Some of them have even funded it, even through the likes of your Fundis and Intellimalis. So we are aware of those things, and we're saying the government must take charge of the sector, or else the sector, it is going to be run aground by opportunists, some of them who are vice-chancellors, by the way. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Chantel, final part?
Okay. Let me also just go on there. We have read the MPT report, but let me also just correct what was said here. The DA was the first one to hand in its blue book to the minister, and it was publicly done. We were the first one to come up with the 3-tier model. We were the first one to give all these proposals. I even on live TV thanked the minister for including the DA's proposals into the MTT report. You can just go back and read the statements on that, and you get an understanding where we come from. With the march tomorrow, we are actually in an agreement that students should have taken to the fight to the Department of Higher Education. The minister has actually been very lackadaisy when it comes to the issues of student funding. He's actually been very quiet. He's not even, I've actually called for a meeting today still with the chairperson of Higher Education Portfolio, asking her that we urgently need to convene a meeting with the minister and NSFAS to discuss these issues that students are facing. We cannot sit idly by. We are seeing students going hungry. Today, some students were evicted and we had to intervene, because on a daily basis we get 80 to 50 requests from students asking us to intervene. And we do that on a daily basis. So for the minister to be quiet while students are suffering, it's actually wanting to say at some stage we must ask, should the minister not be stepping down? Is he still fit for purpose to be in his position? Maybe he's overstayed his welcome way too much. Right. And we need to discuss these things openly and frankly.
I appreciate you both. Thank you very much for coming on, Asive, Dlanjwa, and Chantel King. Let's take a look at your thoughts tonight. 072-110-5584. You have been weighing in on the conversation. And here's what you've had to say on this. Tabile saying, evening to Newzroom. It was inconsiderate of NSFAS to implement that system while knowing very well that there are students who have appealed, and yet their appeals have not been attended to. So how is it possible to implement a system and leave other students behind? Part 2 saying the current system is really a schlep, and the course of the protests at universities, or the cause of protests at universities, can confirm this time. Students are correct, and as uni managers, we bear the brunt of incompetent Prakash. All right, that's how we leave it then.